Today's time-lapse tutorial will be going through the character modeling and texturing process of this pirate here. The project files will be available on Patreon, and there's a link in the description below. This month's new shader is now on Patreon as well. Stay tuned to the end of the video to hear about a collaboration I'm working on with CG Boost. So for this character, I started with box modeling and a subdivision on top of it, which technically you're not really supposed to do in traditional character workflow. The reasoning being that if you have a subdivision multiplier on the entire time, you're not really getting a clear view of the topology and what you're handing off to other artists. However, I was just doing this for myself, so I wasn't as concerned about topology or workflow as much as I was just kind of seeing what I was doing quickly. And you can see here that I want to keep a lot of the details on the character with the clothes rather than separate pieces. I didn't want to deal with things like cloth simulation and whatnot, and it also just didn't fit the look I was going for stylistically. So a lot of these extrusions and things here, I'm doing just kind of in the model itself. As I get in here tight to some of these areas, I'm getting a little bit of kind of pinching from having too many bevels and things close to each other with the subdivision on top. Now this isn't something you'd want to pass off in production, but again, I'm not passing this off for production, so small things like this won't be noticeable in a turntable time-lapse render. So here for the belt and the clothes, I just kind of extruded in and did some small bevels. And then here for the belt buckle, I just wanted to add a small cylinder on the front, and later I'm going to add a bevel. Now for the arms, what I did is I used loop cut tools. That's actually a tool add-on that is included with Blender, but you have to activate it in the preferences. And what I did is I selected the faces that I wanted to extrude the arms from, and then I pressed circle under the loop tools menu, and it kind of takes those edges and creates a circle, so that allows me to kind of extrude a circle out of the side of my body without having to move a bunch of vertices around manually. And then here I'm just extruding the arm and the hook with kind of, again, box modeling, which may not be the most efficient method, but it's just my preferred workflow. I just find it comfortable to work in. So what I'm doing is extruding along that reference image in the back, and then just kind of adding loop cuts with Control R and rotating those to kind of get the shape I wanted, and then scaling them in the front view and the side view. I use the numpad keyboard shortcuts so I can switch in between them quickly. 1 is front and 3 is side. Then I'm adding some additional loop cuts here so I can kind of clean up geometry and set myself up later so that when I go to sculpt and modify this, I want to fill out the chest from the shoulder cavity there. So you see that as the arm connects to the chest, you generally want to fill out the front portion there. And then again on the back, as your arms are kind of out on your back, it kind of flattens out. So I was just doing that to prevent him from looking too noodly, even though he is a stylized character. And here for the hand, I decided to go for kind of like a mitten hand because I was planning on putting him in some leather gloves anyways. And you can see here that I'm still trying to get somewhat accurate hand proportions, even though it is a stylized character. And I'm just kind of quickly jumping in here with the sculpt tool to kind of smooth out a couple things, round out the edges, give them a little bit more of a plump butt, and to go around and kind of smooth out the shoulders, flatten out the shoulders in the back. Hopping onto the peg leg, I just used a cylinder with some extrusions. And again, a subdivision surface modifier on here was probably a messy way to do this, but I was going kind of for speed, not for production quality. Same thing for the boot over here, just doing some extrusions. Now, if you saw how I kind of took that leg and extruded that outwards, if you use extrude and scale, it'll give you a similar effect, but it'll also kind of scale up and give you like a pinched effect, whereas I wanted kind of a straight out effect. So what you do is you actually hit Control I, and that'll kind of inset your faces, but if you hit Control again, then you'll actually extrude out on the normals without kind of scaling up the vertices at all, and that's how you kind of do that rim effect. Things like the nose and the eye, I'm just going to keep as separate objects and then just kind of attach them where I want and sculpt them kind of into place. Now, for the beard coming up here soon, what I'm going to do is actually take part of the face and kind of extrude it off, and then I'm going to take those vertices and pull them back into the face, and I'm going to use that so that I can actually put a hair particle system on it. And then with that hair particle system, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a metaball particle. So metaballs will kind of glob up and attach to each other, and I turn the affluence way up so that it's kind of a sharper gathering, and then I turn the resolution up, which you won't see in the viewport because it would lag everything, but I have it set up so that when I render, it'll kind of up that resolution. So you can see that I'm kind of starting that process here and trying to fill out the beard and get some good size variety. And I wanted to do this because I wanted to kind of have this kind of bubbly, beardy look as opposed to more of a stylized hair or a sculpted hair. And then what I did is just kind of kept rendering and playing. That is the one disadvantage using metaball, is you kind of have to render to see what it's going to look like, but I just kind of keep tweaking it here. I ended up deciding to have them emit from the vertices because I wanted a more uniform look. I didn't want it to look super random because it is a stylized character. Now moving forward with the eye patch, what I do is I'm going to put a curve and then kind of put that curve around the head. I left this part in because I think it's important to see some failures. At first I tried to kind of take the faces around that and extrude those, and it just wasn't working. It was too messy. So I went ahead and used a curve instead and just beveled that and put that behind and just kept it in really tight to the head. It doesn't have to be exact. So I'm just going through and adding some details and some extra bevels. Bevels will always kind of help add detail to your object, and they're going to help you do things like catch light. Getting started on the hat here, this was actually kind of a challenge for me because a pirate hat's kind of a really weird shape. So what I decided to do was take kind of the front piece and extrude that all along and get the shape I want. And then I duplicate this to put it in the back, and then I'm actually going to use some fit lattice modifiers, and then I'm going to kind of bend those in. And this is where it's really important to have a reference because I wasn't really sure how an actual pirate hat was laid out. So you can see here that I kind of have them front and back squishing together and meeting here in the middle. And then when I apply the fit lattice, because I am using a subdivision modifier, which is why I probably shouldn't be doing that, but it actually kind of didn't put the geometry exactly where I wanted it. So I'm just going through and touching up the geometry. Now I want to put the inside of the hat. So what I actually did is cut off the top of the head and duplicate it. And then I just extruded that out so that I could fit that up there to go up into the curvature there. And for my purposes, this hat works pretty great. So now what I'm doing is just kind of getting some rough lighting setups because light will help reveal issues in your geometry. For example, if you're going to have some ugly normals or if you have any unwanted creases or things like that. Now for the fishbowl here, I actually just cut a sphere in half and then I extruded that up, and then I used a solidify modifier which made the object appear solid, and then I kind of added that little lip at the top by extruding up and then scaling out. And then for the fish, he was just a basic little circle with kind of spheres for eyes. I decided to use a mirror modifier for him just to kind of speed the process up, and I was okay with him being uniform. I had the pirate in more of a dynamic pose, so I couldn't really use a mirror modifier on him unless if I wanted to do a full character rig to pose him later, but I felt it would just be quicker to model him in situation. So now that I have the lights up, I can kind of start experimenting with the materials. So here I'm playing with clay shaders, which we've talked about in a previous video of mine. And I'm just kind of playing with colors, and I really like looking at websites like Dribble and Color Hunt for kind of color ideas on my characters. For this character, I was looking at kind of like Aardman characters, if you've ever seen any of their animations, like Chicken Run or Wallace and Gromit. I wanted kind of that style color scheme. And what I'm just going through here is just assigning all the materials. Now I'm not actually doing much material work here in Blender for this video, because for this video and this character, since I wanted to kind of mix and mash some elements, I didn't want to do the whole character in clay. I'm actually just assigning some of the materials so that I can then take it into Substance Painter where I'm going to apply a bunch of realistic and smart materials there. So I'm kind of doing all my clay materials here in Blender, and then I'm going to go through and apply things like leather and worn metal, and I'm going to use smart materials so that it'll kind of automatically add wear and tear to the edges here. For example, the belt buckle, I wanted to add kind of like a darker shade of gold, like it had aged, and kind of put that underneath the top gold, which you can see there around the front edge. Now, the advantage of doing this as Substance Painter is it's got all these smart materials built in that you can get started with and all these kind of easy filters. This could be done in Blender by hand painting masks or using some cavity maps and things like that. I just chose to use Substance Painter because it's a little faster for that process. But again, if you've watched my texture painting video or some of my shader videos, you can accomplish all of this in Blender. And these textures here, although Substance is using some things to kind of like smartly detect edges and things like that, these textures really are mostly just PBR style textures. So if you just download some free PBR textures, you can apply them to your model and get a very similar result. I also wanted to just take this time to show Substance Painter because it is an industry standard tool. Blender is oftentimes used with games, and Substance is heavily used in the game market because it does speed up the texturing workflow so quickly, and especially if you're doing background assets and things like that, you're never going to notice that you don't have a custom shader on there. So here I am exporting all the textures from Substance Painter so that I can use them in Blender. Now they're just a standard PBR texture workflow. So it's just kind of, I have a base color and a metallic map and a roughness map and a normal map. You can export many more maps than that, but that's all I needed for this character since he didn't have any serious deformation or anything else all that unique that needed more maps. But I'm just going through now and applying it to all the different objects and materials that I had before. Now you'll notice that some of these kind of give me some issues when I'm putting in the normal map, and I've noticed that Blender sometimes does that when you're in render mode. So if you actually just unplug the normal map and replug it back in, it'll fix that. It's also important to note, most people don't do this. If you are importing maps for a PBR texture, you're going to want to set a majority of those to be non-color. So here I am back in Blender, and I just like texture painting in Blender better, and I'm more familiar with it. So I'm kind of going through and doing some texture painting here that I'm going to overlay onto my other materials. So here I'm just painting into the base color of the leather hat and just adding a little heart up there with an arrow through it. And then I'm going through on my clay shader for my face and adding some small details. Then of course I added some stripes on the shirt, and I'm just going to add some little pupils on the fish here. First, I decided I was going to do it with spheres, and I just didn't like the way that was looking, so I went ahead and just texture painted on a white background there. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you're able to learn something. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Again, these project files are on Patreon, and I also want to take this moment to share that I did a small collaboration with CG Boost, and they've also asked me to become an affiliate. They have great online courses. They do cost, but they're well worth the money. You can check out a link in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Let me know what you'd like to see next.